Over the many years that I've been playing Minecraft, I've almost exclusively played in survival mode, never really building much in creative. But for quite a while now, I've been getting the itch to test my skills and do some sort of mega build in creative mode with tools like World Edit. So why not build the entire Breath of the Wild map? You heard me right. Okay, so before we get into building all of Hyrule in Minecraft, there are a few things that we need to go over. Now, I'm sure you've seen people recreate the Breath of the Wild map before, such as Alask Does Games, who made the map using World Painter. But the difference is, I'm going through the map and adding everything. I'll be building Hyrule Castle, the Guardians, the Divine Beasts, even all the random ruins spread throughout Hyrule. I'm building everything. Obviously though, I can't do this all in one video. This will be a multi-part series, each episode covering a different region of the map. In today's episode, we will be focusing on the Great Plateau, and of course, making the actual map to build on. And one final note before we get into it, I already know that people will be asking for a world download. I've always kind of been on the fence about doing world downloads for my builds, but if I do decide to do one, it will not be until the project is fully complete. Now, we have a lot of building to cover in this episode, so let's get started. Alright, first things first, how are we going to get the full map into Minecraft? Am I really going to terraform the whole thing myself? Well, no. There's actually a really nifty software called World Painter, which allows you to, well, paint your own world using the various tools it provides. I planned to use this to make the map, but when I was tutoring around the software, I noticed this button, Import from Height Map. Would it really be that easy to make the map? Well, pretty much. I searched up a height map on Google and I just picked the first one I found and I tried to import it into the software and it worked. As you can see here, the map turned out pretty cool and I was kind of looking around it for the first time and you can already make out some of the distinctive features of the Breath of the Wild map. But it wasn't perfect and I would have to edit the terrain a little bit, most notably the water levels, as they were way off what they should be. And here it is, you can see it when I'm fully zoomed out. It actually looks so cool. I quickly opened this very bare bones map with nothing done to it just to see what the terrain looked like. This is Death Mountain? Oh my god! I think this is the island the castle's supposed to be on. This is the island the castle would be on, it just feels really far north. This is definitely the Gerudo Highlands. I think this is the Yiga clan entrance, and then that's the tower with a giant chasm. And eventually it should just cut off. I found the edge of the map. I messed around with the scale of the map a little bit before I imported a new map with the sea level as low as it could go so that you could actually see the map. And so I got to work on fixing and polishing the map so that it was ready to be built upon. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through these early bits pretty fast because I don't think they're that entertaining and we still have a lot to get to. The first thing I wanted to do with the map was get the water level right and put in all the little lakes and ponds around the map. I started down by Eventide Island because I could use the shape of the island and kind of like compare the shorelines from the Minecraft map to the actual map to see if the water level was at the right place. Then I moved up kind of into the Lanayru and Farron region to put in all the lakes and rivers, but I didn't really understand at this point how the flooding tool worked with World Painter. You can kind of see me struggling with it because I just didn't get it at the time. This was my first time using World Painter, so I didn't really know what I was doing for most of this part. But gradually I figured out how exactly it worked, and I was able to put in most of the water around the map, but because of how the tool worked, I couldn't add all of it in, and I'd have to go through manually and add some of the water in these lakes. After a while of working in this region, I zoomed out and just realized that all the rivers had filled up because of how the tool works. I worked on the water levels a bit more, but I'm going to kind of skip past it so that we can get to the other stuff. I then went through and added the sandy shores to mostly the bottom right section of the map, and I tried some stuff with Death Mountain, but it didn't really work out. For the most part, the rest of the time I was in World Painter, I was just working out what blocks I wanted to use for Death Mountain and the Gerudo Highlands. I ended up choosing terracotta for both as a bit of a temporary block and we can change it later if need be. And I also turned the Gerudo Desert into, well, an actual desert. And in the end, this is what the finished map looked like. There are definitely some changes that will be made in the future, such as the snow layers in the top left corner. There's just not enough snow there. And I may or may not have really screwed up the lava levels at Death Mountain, but we'll save that for a future episode. Now let's get into the actual building. Before starting on the Great Plateau, there are a few other things we need to do. Spread across the map are 15 sheikah towers and 120 shrines, so I wanted to build these up now so that I could easily copy and paste them around the map. And since I would be building the towers and the shrines, I figured I might as well build the guardians while I was at it. After all, we would need some decayed guardians to put on the actual Great Plateau. So first up on the list, the sheikah towers. So because of the scale that I had chosen for this map, it was kind of hard to go into much detail, and you're going to see that in a little bit I'm actually going to even scale down the tower I'm building here. Getting the little platforms that come off the side was pretty challenging, and even now I'm not sure that I really did it that well, but we're going to leave it as is for now. And then once I changed the scale of the tower, I went back through and evenly spaced out all of the platforms. Each tower has different placements of their little ledges, but I don't know if I'm going to go so in detail as to change every single one of them. Moving up to the top of the tower, it was pretty fun to try to come up with this design and choose the correct blocks for this since I couldn't go so in depth with the design. But I like the choice of using deep slate and the terracotta. They fit the colors of the tower pretty nicely. At the top of the tower, there were these little antenna things, which were pretty tricky to get looking good with this scale, but it worked out in the end, I think, and with that, the sheikah tower was finished. For the shrine, I really only had to build one of these because they are all identical, but I would have to build a diagonal one on a 45-degree rotation to fit some of the positions of the shrines. There's not much to say about the shrines. You can see I even got the little sheikah eye done at the top there. So we are going to move straight on. Now for the moment I'm sure most of you guys have been waiting for. It is time to build the Guardians. Okay, so the Guardians were quite a challenge to build up. This first clip you're seeing was 55 minutes of building just to get the first Guardian design down. And you can see I kind of was messing with it a lot with the scale, and I made some pretty atrocious designs, as you probably saw on the right there. For some reason, I had it in my mind that the head needed to be separated from the body somehow, and I kept trying to do that, but once I just kind of put the head directly attached to the body, it worked out. And once I had the base body design, it was time for the legs. I decided to use smooth quartz and iron trapdoors for this. I'm pretty happy with how the legs look, although looking back, they might be a bit too long. But still, I think the Guardian ended up looking really cool. Then I began to make some alternate versions of that Guardian, the first one being the same exact thing, but it's kind of walking or ready to attack. The second one we made was a slightly decayed one. There are some Guardians that are kind of decayed, but not fully, so that's what this one was. Next up was a fully decayed Guardian, which is no longer functioning, overtaken by nature. These would be the kind of Guardians that we would put on the Great Plateau. And finally, I made another variation of the Decayed Guardian that still has some of its legs, and I switched out the Decayed Guardian's legs to deep slate to show them blackened and aged. Now, with some templates that we would be using throughout the entire build project complete, we were finally ready to move on to the Great Plateau. And this is where things kind of started to get difficult. Now, sitting before you is the Great Plateau, a massive area of land that is elevated off of the ground. This area acts as the tutorial region of Breath of the Wild. The first logical thing to do was to paste in the sheikah tower and the shrines that were scattered across the plateau. But as I mentioned, the Great Plateau is elevated off of the ground, and a lot of the surrounding cliffs have man-made walls built into them. These walls were the first thing that I decided to tackle. There was once an entrance to get up onto the plateau, however, at the time of Breath of the Wild, it has been flooded and caved in. Due to where the entrance was located, I actually had to build it diagonally, which is always difficult, and I couldn't get it to look right. So I decided to build it on the regular straight-on axis, whatever you call it, and use World Edit to rotate it 45 degrees. But the rotation process never works very smoothly with World Edit, so there were still some gaps I had to fill in and other things that I had to fix up. After placing the entrance into its proper location, I went to work on the top side a little bit more. The only thing I really had to add were these sort of statues or gargoyles on either side of the entrance. With the entrance finished, I began to work on the design for the rest of the walls, which thankfully all has the same design. But because of the curvature of the Great Plateau, some of these walls would have to be diagonal like the entrance. I decided to do the same thing for the walls that I did for the entrance. I built it up on the regular axis and then used World Edit to rotate it 45 degrees. And I also made a third variant which is closer to a 22 degrees rotation. With the 3 variants of the same wall finished, I just had to paste them in and the first section of the wall was finished. For the rest of the walls, it was pretty simple. I just had to paste in the designs that I had already made. The only annoying part is that I had to sort of mold the surrounding terrain into the walls, and I would have to fill up some holes later. I'm sure you've already seen that some of the terrain around the walls was cut away awkwardly when I pasted it in, but I would fix all of that later. In some spots, like around the backside of the plateau here, I had to make completely custom terrain to fit where the walls were supposed to go, but thanks to World Edit, it really was not that bad. The only thing left to do now was to ruin the walls. The entirety of the Great Plateau is mostly in ruins, including these walls, so I got to go through and add all sorts of cracked stone brick, cobblestone, leaves. I got to tear holes in the walls to really make it look ancient, forgotten, and ruined, which would be a recurring theme throughout this build process. Before we could start building things on the actual top of the Great Plateau, I wanted to finish all of the landscaping. Part of this landscaping was to implement all of the trees around the Great Plateau, but the default Minecraft trees are kind of lame, so I decided that I would make my own custom trees to spread across the plateau, and the rest of the Breath of the Wild map, of course. Throughout the Great Plateau, there are 3 main types of trees, and for each tree type, I would need a few different trees so that the forests aren't entirely made of the same exact tree. The first I made were the birch trees, which came out the worst in my opinion. Now, I am not that good at making custom trees, and I'm not that happy with the results of these. So, in the future, as I get better, I might eventually come back and improve these trees. Next up were the tall spruce trees that would mainly go in the mountainous region of the Great Plateau. In my opinion, these ones came out the best, but that's mostly because I've actually had some experience making custom spruce trees in the past. Later, I would also make snowy variants with some snow layers scattered across the leaves for the ones that would be going in the mountain. Next up were the oak trees, which at first I thought came out very badly, but looking back, they're not as bad as I thought they were, but they're still not great. I think I could have made these trees better, but I was trying to stick to the same style as the ones in Breath of the Wild. They kind of look like lollipops, with all of the leaves centered around the top, which I guess pretty much every tree in existence is like that. It makes sense in my head, okay? Heading back onto the Great Plateau, I was ready to finish up the landscaping and add all of my custom trees. To start, I put in the giant lake that sits up in the cold region of the plateau, and changed all the grass in this region to snow blocks. I even let it snow a bit to scatter some snow layers across the whole region before I started to put in my spruce trees. Next, I put in the birch trees, but really there wasn't that much room to put any. The forest was kind of small, but I also got to put in some of the regular spruce trees along the back. Moving on to the other side of the plateau, there was a very dense forest that I had to put in place. There were also some lone oak trees spread across the rest of the plateau, which I planted as well. And while I wasn't recording, I made these very small trees, almost like bushes that I could spread throughout the forest as well. You might be able to catch a few of them in these wide shots. With the landscaping complete, we could finally begin to build some of the structures scattering the plateau. Following Link's journey as he wakes up, I began with the Shrine of Resurrection, where the entire game starts. And of course, I had to build it on the diagonal, which just made it a little bit more annoying, but in the end, I think I made a pretty good replica of it. I followed the path down the hill towards where you first meet the old man, and put in the old campsite, even making sure to put in the baked apple on the floor. Further down the path, we come across a ruined building, which is a part of the Temple of Time structure, but I decided to save the rest of that for the end of the episode. I also built the ruined fountain with a bit of a staircase that heads down towards the entrance of the plateau. At the flooded entrance of the plateau, I had to put in some walls along the side, which conveniently happened to be torn straight from the walls of the plateau itself. But I also got to put in my first ruined guardian, which was pretty cool. I also built up the first bokoblin camp right next to the entrance. These would all be pretty much identical with the same tower designs and the log near the campfire. Heading over towards the birch forest, there were some other ruins scattered alongside some other bokoblin camps. One of these bokoblin camps was a skull camp. Some of these camps that you can find across the Breath of the Wild map are actually stone dens in the shape of giant skulls. And I think I did a pretty good job at replicating the design. It might not look much like a skull, but it definitely looks similar to what it is in Breath of the Wild. Then I finished up the other ruins in this area, including a section of the Great Plateau wall, which is here for some reason. Nearby the Skull Camp is one of the 4 shrines located on the plateau. This shrine in particular is surrounded with the ruins of some ancient structure, along with some ruined guardians. The last structure on the way to the birch forest is a bridge which goes over a small valley. Looking back, I think this bridge was actually split in half in the game, which I forgot to do in the Minecraft map. Moving on to the final build of this region, the Old Man's Hut. This was a pretty simple build, there wasn't much to it, it was just tricky to get the roof color right, and I ended up having to go with a slightly inaccurate color, and there was also another bokoblin camp nearby. Apart from the mountainous region of the plateau, the only section we had left to build in was the lush forest. I started off with one of the small camps that the old man used to sit at before moving on to the great tree trunk. There's a very large felled tree in this forest, and it looks a little bit wonky with the fallen tree trunk, but it was really the only way I could get this to work. Because, of course, I had to build it diagonally, so it was kind of hard to get the angle of the fallen trunk right. But in the end, it worked out, and later I would go back and add even more moss to it to show that it's really been sitting there a long time. Right next to the tree as well is a pretty large bokoblin camp with some ruins scattered in with it. There were also some bone piles in this camp, so I used some skeleton heads, bone blocks, and invisible item frames to scatter these bones around the area. I went through the forest and added a lot more greenery to it because I felt like it should be more lush and vibrant, and as you could see, it turned out pretty amazing looking. All that was left now was the mountainous region of the Great Plateau. Starting on this side, I added in a felled guardian with a ruined wall next to it, as well as a broken bridge that used to be used to get across the river. Then I backtracked for a moment, going back to build up the entrance gate near where the Temple of Time will be. Just on the inside of this gate, there was more to build. Another ruined bridge with a raft, but I couldn't get the raft to look right. There was also another guardian here with the ruins of a wooden shack. Finally, I felt like the peak of the mountain didn't look right. It wasn't very accurate to what it is in Breath of the Wild, so I decided to edit it a bit. It kind of bulges out a bit and then goes back up to a thin peak, and there's also a little rock formation at the top of it, which is theorized to be the king's grave. One last thing to mention, I know some of you guys might be telling me, oh, but you missed this or you missed that. There was a lot of building which I didn't show you guys due to time restraints with this video. You could see in this clip, I built up some other camps and stuff along this region of the Great Plateau. I really tried to do a thorough job looking through the Great Plateau and making sure I got everything, and I think I did. But of course, there's still one main structure we have to build up. The Temple of Time. So, there were still some ruins in this area of the map leading up towards the Temple of Time, but there was nothing that special about them. They were pretty similar to each other, so I'm gonna go past these pretty quickly and get straight on to the actual temple. It took 3 attempts for me to get the entrance tower done right. The first one was not that bad, the second one was pretty bad, but I used this second design as a template to build the final one. I went into so much more detail with this final one, which is what really made it better than the others, and it still kept pretty accurate to the original design. Just getting this middle tower done on its own took so long. I was really struggling with this one. Moving on, there are 2 smaller towers on either side of the main one, which are kind of just like mini replicas of the middle one, with a bit of a connecting thingy between the 2 of them. After finishing up the mini tower design, I moved back to the main one to finish the top of it. The pointed peak was something that was really annoying to get down because of its square base, but it worked out in the end, and I replicated a smaller one to the other tower before pasting it to the other side. Moving back along to the bulk of the temple, this wall design was pretty simple and I could copy paste it along the whole thing. And the same goes for the roof. I ended up adding these strips of andesite to break up the deep slate roof, which isn't really accurate to the design, but I feel it's necessary to make it look good. The back of the temple was pretty basic too, with a bit of a thing that comes out to make room for the goddess statue inside. And I was even able to implement a worn down golden Triforce. But as you all know, just like the rest of the Great Plateau, the Temple of Time is in ruins. The left tower was completely torn down and I added a gaping hole in the side of the temple, which honestly makes the structure look very unsupported. Moving on to the interior, I tidied up the front wall a little bit, still making it ruined, but making it look like there was actually once a wall there. I then finished up the other walls with the same pillar design as the exterior, and put in a roof design which is accurate to the actual game. Along the backside there's a bit of a step up with almost little green garden areas on either side, and in the middle is the goddess statue. I thought the goddess statue would be very hard to build on this scale, but it actually just kind of worked out on my first try. And I'm actually very pleased with how accurate the statue looks. Moving back outside, I finished up the walls and the platform holding up the temple, and this is when it becomes apparent that the Temple of Time is way too big for this scale. Now for the final touches. After adding some cracked and mossy stone bricks, I put in a bunch of jungle leaves as well to show its overgrown nature, and on the inside added a bunch of dangling vines. And with that, the Great Plateau was finished. And here is the finished Great Plateau. I'm very pleased with how this turned out and so excited to keep going with this project. And for the future of this project, I don't really know what we're doing next episode. I just know that next episode is happening. I really want to do Hyrule Castle, but I feel like that should be saved for more of a climactic finish to the whole project. So if there's something you really want to see me build, comment it down below and I might do it in the next episode. But one thing is for sure, we'll get to it eventually. But oh my god, this video has been going on way too long. I've stayed up till 4 AM editing and uploading this, so we gotta end this episode. So thank you all for watching this episode. If you guys don't want to miss the series, then I recommend you subscribe, because of course I would. I have no guarantees for when part 2 is gonna come out, it's just whenever I finish it. So, I'll see you guys then.